Hello, everybody. My name is Roland.
I'm Rish.
And today we are talking about the Scramble for Africa 2.0. And Rish, you had a very good look into what's going on in Africa right now.
Well, I would always say if you want to find out what things are going on, follow the money. And China, particularly, is putting a lot of money into Africa. There is several ways that we can observe this. There's several things that we can talk about, and it all ties back into the UN and the way African countries have started changing their votes post 1970 in China's favor. And I believe this is a direct involvement to the Chinese coming to Africa and doing these large scale infrastructure projects. For instance, you have railway projects from Tanzania to Zimbabwe. You have housing projects in Angola. You also have a large scale dam project in Angola. You have the Kenya Standard Gauge Railway. China has its first abroad military base in Djibouti, right next to two French, one Japanese, and one American base, all within the span of a few kilometers. They're all nestled right there. And then you also have, let's see, going back to my notes, a hydroelectric dam in Nigeria, a phosphate plant in Algeria, a Nigerian railway, also standard gauge, and the Suez Canal Special Economic Zone in Egypt. So I'd like to jump into all of these. What's your side of the pond?
Well, looking at it from a European perspective, exactly like you said, and we see this for well, we didn't see it the last 20, 30 years, where I say Europe has been asleep at the wheel, looking at our industries. For example, German car manufacturing. Yeah, German car manufacturing was world leading up until, let's say, the 90s, and slowly but steady, this has declined in a tremendous way. Not only because the Japanese cars were more and more accepted in Europe, and I think at some point in the 90s, Toyota was the biggest seller in cars in Europe, or particularly in Germany.
And they
And
have
where I'm coming
also made
from,
a hard push for the US market. We
yeah,
have Toyota manufactories in Georgia,
yeah,
the heart of the South.
we have so many changes where I say Europe has not been up to speed in this kind of thing. And now what we talked about last week, the resource side, is something where all of a sudden everybody's eyes are opening and we realize, well, the Chinese are 10, 20 years ahead in Africa with investment in infrastructure and so on.
And
But
5G.
not only 5G. I mean that's a topic. Let's start there. In Asia, no matter where you go, Chinese suppliers like Huawei are the ones where countries go to for their 5G. And I'm not naming the place, very easy to find out. The Chinese supplier, also not mentioning the name, set up a server system for a government in another Asian country. And when something broke down or something didn't add up, I don't remember exactly what was the cause. That government actually looked into their own server infrastructure, and they found out all these servers are sending their data back to Beijing. So my thing is, where I'm coming from a European
Intellectual
perspective,
espionage.
not only on the intellectual or industrial scale, it is plain espionage. Let's call it what it is. And it is interesting because I know the Chinese perspective, because I lived there for 5 years. I know the Chinese perspective on this. And from a European side, particularly with Africa, how could we have been asleep for the last 20, 30, or even more years, how can the Chinese be 10, 20 years ahead with the kind of offering what they are giving these countries, standard gauge railways, which is a Chinese thing.
Which are replacing European narrow wage
Yep.
that were built in the 1910s.
Yep. Namibia is
there
still running on
was a
German
railway
trucks and
infrastructure
railroads.
there.
Yeah.
There was a railway
So
infrastructure there,
why
but
does the middle
China
of
is replacing it
Africa?
with standard gauge.
Yeah. Why doesn't the middle of Africa need an international airport? And another thing, and I want to finish this round of my thoughts with something what I saw on so many projects and what has finally, hopefully, over the last couple of weeks and months, also opened African people's eyes to what's going on in their countries. There is now several laws in several stages of passing through parliaments in Africa that are increasing scrutiny or outright forbidding Chinese investment in critical infrastructure. Because what a lot of these projects are running into, there is an agreement that a Chinese company is the lead contractor, will subcontract to African local companies, hire such and such percentage of local people.
But they did not follow through on that.
Exactly. That's the point.
So let's talk about I'd like to go ahead and jump into the dams. So China has a lot of experience with building dams. They have done several large scale projects in China, and now they are exporting their dam building process for hydroelectric power into several African nations.
Yeah. I will just mention Three Gorges Dam, and I think it was 2020, in the middle of 2020, just after the first round of lockdowns was over in China, and we were allowed to get out of the house. All of a sudden, all over the news, but of course not in China, is the Three Gorges Dam safe? And topping with a simulation by a Chinese professor, actually, what would happen if that thing ever breaks? And
death, destruction.
Yeah, basically 5 hours later, China is gone across the Yangtze Delta. Yeah, but well, 20 hours because it's a long river. But that prompted people to look at the Three Gorges Dam from a couple of angles and new angles, and a couple of secret documents apparently leaked. But what happened is the typical story of, yes, the Three Gorges Dam is safe. No, it is not bending due to water pressure. And then the opposing side of the argument saying, well, here is the satellite picture. It is actually bending. And then the admission, yes, it is bending, but that is safe. It's still safe. We calculated that. And for several months across the news, how much corruption and cheap, shoddy building practices have been uncovered when building the Three Gorges Dam.
But this is a consistent issue that's always brought up with Chinese manufacturing, whether it's domestic or exported abroad.
I have to say that Chinese construction practices on paper, I have to say on paper, are the best in the world. There's no doubt about that. But how it is enacted on every single building site is a whole different story.
It's a roll of the dice.
What you were saying?
It's a roll of the dice.
Yes, and no.
And I mean that as the contractors that they bring in, do they deliver a quality product? And I would say it's a roll of the dice. It's a flip of the coin. There is reputable Chinese contractors that do deliver quality
without
work.
a doubt.
There is.
Without a doubt.
And there is some that are propped up by the government or by bribes that deliver a product that is below board.
Well, bribes is corruption is a huge issue, but What I was going to say is the practical implementation is that, well, first of all, the government has seen, yes, it's good on paper, but still you have these what they call tofu drag projects where stuff is crumbling because they don't put enough cement in the concrete. So they now have a government inspector on every building site by law to check the bloody concrete every single day. So how that is in practice, is that person really checking every day? Is that person checking at all? Or is that person getting a bribe? Is it cheaper to bribe that person? Because one of the issues, what has led to this corruption is that margins are even tighter in China about construction than what they are in the US or in Europe.
And I can speak to the difference between concrete and cement.
Yeah.
So you have in America, you have type 1, type 2, Portland cement. You also have slag cement. Cement is a product onto its own.
Yeah.
Cement is not considered concrete until you add an aggregate. So that would be sand or gravel or something
Yeah.
of that nature, a solid product added to that.
Yeah.
So if your concrete is not sound, your cement will have no binding. And that's something
Exactly.
as a construction professional that I excel in. I know this is something I work with on a day-to-day basis. So it should be noted that there is a difference between concrete and cement. That is the difference.
Of course. So what is happening is they don't put enough cement into the concrete mixture. Another thing that is very popular is they use steel rebar that is as flubbery as rubber. And when you put these things together, it looks great on the outside, but it does not withstand the elements, or a lot of areas in China have minor earthquakes all year round. You don't even feel it, like in Japan or in San Francisco, where it's daily earthquakes that people don't feel anymore after a couple of months living there. So what you have there is constant wear and tear on these buildings that are not built up to the standard they are supposed to be built on. And a big problem with that is, even if sticking to those building codes that they have in China, how well are these building codes going back to Africa now? How do they hold up these buildings and constructions, these bridges and stuff in Africa? Completely different climate, completely different foundation, completely different soil and stuff. So,
humidity makes such a huge deal in the construction industry.
We have, where I lived in China, we have humidity that is killing you. You have 40 degrees in the shade and humidity 80% and more.
See,
so,
I, being from the southeast of America, being a resident of Florida, living on the Gulf Coast, that to us is normal. 40 degrees centigrade and 80 to 95% humidity is just our normal conditions.
Yeah.
It's just a fact of life. And throwing a hurricane here and there.
I was about to say there's certainly different kinds of environment here, because where I'm from, it is a much more continental climate. Yeah. So with not that big of an amplitude where I live, but if it's 30 degrees, it's actually hot. Yeah. And it is rather dry where I'm from. Right now, I live in the UK. It is way more humid. I think Edinburgh is one of the most humid places here in the UK. And one of the things is,
I don't know. Hey, that next vote for independence might not be the UK anymore.
Completely different topic. And yes, I have registered to vote. So yeah, I mean, with what's going on, that's certainly something we should be talking about on a different level right now. I mean, we touched some time ago the topic of Brexit and bringing Brexit and energy together. Right now, today, yesterday, basically, our still Prime Minister said, yeah, the government assistance for these prospective and current energy bills doesn't really help, but F all I'm going to do about it. Yep. And the next one is doing even less.
So to bring it back, and I love that you brought up government, let's talk about the UN. Let's talk about Africa 2.0 as far as what has the Chinese billions and billions and billions of dollars. I could read you off numbers. They're all fact checkable. I have them. But just in a broader conversation, look at the way that the UN African countries, the member states, have voted post 1970.
Yeah.
And it all started with the, the Tanzar Railway, Tanzania to Zimbabwe. That was the first railways, the first infrastructure projects that China ever invested. It was still under Mao. That was their, hey, we're here, let's talk business. And I really feel like viewing the voting in the UN, it's been infrastructure for votes, because the way that African nations and key African nations have voted in the UN in regards to Chinese policy has changed extremely since 1970. And it is overwhelmingly went from the West towards China and several key African nations. So I feel like there's infrastructure for votes on the international scale, and that's their true motivation in Africa 2.0. Thoughts and feelings?
I mean, don't get me started on the UN.
I'm getting you started.
What we have seen, especially over the last, say, 4 or 5 years, looking at the UN, really questioning, is this organization still fit for purpose? Because what has happened, especially much more visibly over this time span that I just mentioned, is that China is subverting these democratic on paper institutions, and we are ending up with countries like China on the Human Rights Council. I mean,
that's absurd.
At that point, you can say you can can it, yeah, you can can it for the very obvious reasons, and that is not to say that other nations on that council have a better track record, but when I have the choice, plain direct with you, with the American way of human rights, and even up to the point where we are going into other countries where we don't belong, take out people and put them in a prison where they don't have rights, looking at that scale,
yeah,
where
we do
it has
that.
happened,
we do that,
and looking at the Chinese scale, I know which side I would be on. So, but you and I, in the Western world, in the States, in Europe, we talk about it, we criticize it, we say we can do this better. If we even open our mouth and say this is happening in other countries, like China, like Saudi Arabia, like many other places,
bye, you disappear.
Yeah, you don't exist. And if somebody asks your wife, your husband, your parents, your children, oh, I never knew that person. That is what is happening. But back to this kind of voting in favor of China. One of the things that I have seen also since the pandemic is that a couple of nations have finally gotten around to this idea: we don't need an international airport. We don't need a railway that is not doing anything for us. And
that operates at
a
loss consistently year over year.
Tell me about it.
If you need it, it will be profitable year. on a year-to-year basis, it will be profitable if it is necessary.
If it was necessary, but then somebody else would also build it, right?
Mm-hmm.
But what I was looking at, I think it was Uganda, Kenya, and a couple of other nations got together. There was this incident where, and the video was leaked by African people that live in China, that people were banned from the local McDonald's, that people were kicked out of their homes because you bring COVID. Yeah, all that bullshit. And it was black people, strangely. Yeah. And one ambassador just mentioned, oh, well, there's 30,000 Chinese people living in my country back home. We leave them alone. Open bracket for now. Mm-hmm. So, and very soon after, these news disappeared. Yeah. Another thing that just recently, I think it was last month, leaked was this Chinese guy going into Malawi, giving African kids some signs to hold up into the camera that were in Chinese with extremely racial slurs. I'm not even going to repeat them. The video is on YouTube. The video is, this has been investigated by BBC. Yes, BBC, yes, this is what was happening. And I'm like, for Christ's sake, and you are saying we have a problem with racism in Western countries. We don't. Not in the scale what is going on in China. Not in the scale that we would go to another country to do this kind of stuff, to make a video. I mean, what if I was to do that and do that in German, make this kind of racist video for my German racist audience, I would be so quickly in a jail, God knows where, probably.
Well, as far as American racism goes, that could be an entire episode on its own, and I have so many things to say about that, but we're keeping it Africa.
Different story for a different day. But
that's a 2-hour episode.
Easily. I mean, same thing. I never encountered racism until I lived in China, and this is not white privilege or being insensitive to racial issues, but the fact of the matter is, racism is percentage-wise so much less of an issue where I am from and the circles I move about, and probably the same for you. But on a daily occurrence is where I'm saying, yes, racism is a problem. But again, going back to what we said about energy security, Africa, and so on. Let's accept for a moment the fact that, yes, voluntarily or not, the UN has been complicit in this kind of thing, that enabling or making it possible for nations to vote against their interest, furthering interests of a nation where we have to say the values their leadership follows is entirely different from what our leadership follows, yours, mine, and what you and me as a person would be considering good leadership, good values, and so on. And what makes this so tragic for me is we Europeans, we have the bloody template to do it better. We can create not only a capitalism that is better for all participants, we have right in the drawer the projects, the plans, and the funding to create infrastructure that is needed, not only for us as a receiving nation, but for the African nations as well.
But see, I
And
would argue the point that the reason why China is so successful in exporting their ideas to China is because they have, through not only their government, but their government run organizations, the Chinese banks, they have made themselves a one stop shop. And everyone loves a one stop shop.
yeah,
They can finance, design, build, and maintain any national infrastructure that you wish to build.
exactly,
And
exactly.
they
And
will offer great interest
problem number
rates to no
two.
interest rates. But countries that have received infrastructure when China needed a vote in the UN and it didn't come, well, now you're behind on your payments. Where before, if you were behind on your payments and you voted the right way, well, we'll get it next month. But when you don't vote the right way, it's, oh, you're 3 months behind.
Yeah. Well,
Fuck you, pay me.
that's a completely different story. And if you go to Sri Lanka, Pakistan, and a couple of other countries right now, you
Well,
will have,
there's 70 countries in the Belt and Road Initiative.
yeah,
Africa was just the focus of this video.
yeah,
But if we want to get into the Belt and Road Initiative,
very
there's
similar
70
story everywhere.
there's 70 different
Yeah.
countries, and it's always
I tell you what the problem
one
is.
narrative.
I tell you what the problem is with this. This one-stop shop is only part of the issue, where it is very attractive for countries to
Well, yeah,
sign up
like
for this.
we need this. We need money. We need engineering. We need
Yeah.
technical
Now,
expertise. We need boots on the ground.
again, I will
It's
I
a
will say
very
that.
attractive business model.
Yeah,
It is.
absolutely. And
Absolutely.
if I take you right now and I throw you into the right places in China, you will immediately say, or anybody not thinking further about this, wow, everything works. Everything is new, everything is clean. But go a couple of meters off that path where you as a Western tourist or as a Western expatriate are going or are allowed to go. Yeah, you are not, even nowadays, you are not allowed to go just anywhere. So there was one incident when I went on the train from where we lived to Shanghai, and one of the people sitting there, how is this foreigner allowed to go on a train? And the lady in the train had to tell them, yes, we don't lock them up anymore. So basically,
Wow.
but no, seriously, there is so many restrictions that are not even visible to you when you go there. For example, you are not allowed to live in the same building complex with
Dwelling.
a government official. Yeah. So if a government official lives in a certain building complex of residential housing, you as a foreigner are not allowed to go there. Period. You're not allowed to live there. Another thing is you can basically call it police in every single residential area. And in that station is a person that is responsible to know where all the foreigners in that complex are right now at this moment.
So an informant. His job
Basically,
title is
yes.
to inform
Basically, yes. So,
on foreign movement.
and yes, this is a real thing. Yeah, this is not some dystopian thing that I'm making up right now. This is government policy. And I think what is the big problem here with countries in Africa or even Western countries not following or believing these kind of things is, number one, we don't think that way, which is the biggest issue. The second issue is this information and language gap. Information is 100% controlled in China. You don't see anything on the TV, on a billboard, or here in the radio if it is not approved at the highest level of government. So let's just say there is a car accident. somebody with political connections got drunk, ran someone over. That is not going to be on the news. If you as a foreigner pass some wind and somebody is offended with the smell, it will be on the news for 3 weeks. That is how information works in China. Information has a purpose.
So do you think that's why some of the African governments are getting wise and starting to enact legislation through parliament?
Wait for it. I'm going to make that point in specific. Right now, conservative estimates say that 75% of the internet cannot be accessed in China without a VPN. And I would argue it is closer to 90% these days. On the other side, a huge chunk of the Chinese internet is not accessible outside of China without a VPN. So Chinese people going abroad need a VPN to go into the Chinese internet. And what is happening over, or ask yourself the question, or viewers ask themselves the question, why do we have these Xinjiang leaks of the police files now? Why do we have so many government documents at the highest level of government? Yeah, we are talking about, in the Soviet Union would be the Politburo, yeah? But Xi Jinping, his office and ministerial offices, why are these documents leaked these days? Why is there Chinese people in mainland China translating what's going on the Chinese side of the internet and post that on, for example, Twitter? Why are these things happening? We didn't have any social change for the last 40, 50 years in China. Yes, people got more wealthy, especially in the cities. But any form of social change that comes with or would come with these changes was suppressed by the government, by consecutive governments, starting with Mao, ending with Xi right now. And at some point, referring to another video I made, Martek's Law, hint, 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 at some point, the tension between what you are putting out as the narrative and reality is so big, the narrative collapses. And what we have right now is more and more Chinese people are questioning the narrative of the government. More and more of these people that question the narrative are leaking information willingly or deliberately or willingly in order to actually advance the narrative in China. So these people have very patriotic motivation here. They say, if we, or in much more simplified terms, it is not the world that needs to understand China. China needs to understand the world. It's not the World Trade Organization joining China, it's China joining the World Trade Organization, and so on and so on. So with all this information now coming out of China, with all this information from Western countries going into China, more and more people are aware of, well, no, COVID is not that bad outside of China. We want to leave because it is much worse here. So what is the next step? We are cutting up people's passport at the border so they can't leave China. And fun fact, I know a couple of people who have their accounts frozen, overseas Chinese, who have their accounts frozen in China. And they are being told, well, if you want to unfreeze your account so that you can pay your bills in China, order something online for a relative, you need to come back to China, to your bank, and unfreeze your account. Open bracket, no, we are not letting you back out. So again, this is something, and I can see it on your face. What the fuck is he talking about? This is not happening, but yes, it is. This is what is happening. This is what's happening when you see a narrative is collapsing around the very people that have put up the narrative. And instead of coming clean, so I see the only governments.
We're hiring 87,000 new IRS agents in America. The EPA, the
How many of them speak Chinese?
The Environmental Protection Agency during the Obama administration, they were ordering billions, would it be billions of bullets and ordering anti-tank rockets. This is the Environmental Protection Agency. So as far as fuckery in government goes, it's worldwide.
Absolutely.
Why would the EPA need anti-tank rockets?
Well, you don't know how militant Americans can get, right? But no.
I don't know. I am a militant American.
Well, but when I put it to you, just on that tangent, you have heard the government has tanks, right? So all your guns are pointless. But that's not the thing I was making. The only government office, and this should also tell people something. The only government office that, and I'm saying it's deliberate, has started to clean up its act is anything that has to do with the economy. When the housing crisis started earlier this year, in March or April, the economic data that came out of China was surprisingly honest. We all know how Chinese economic data is made. It's what the chairman says. That is the economic data we are getting. But the economic data that came out of China contradicted economic data that came out of China the previous quarter, the previous years, and so on and so on. We are seeing a lot of cleaning up house in this particular government office, and I'm wondering why that is the case, and why some people say that is the only political rival that Xi has left. It is particularly that faction of the party. So another thing that people don't understand outside of China is, yes, it is a one-party state, but even in a one-party state, you have a lot of different opinions inside that party.
I would think, because we are a two-party state, I recognize that there are multiple factions within each of our two political parties,
Yep,
which are the only viable parties that can be elected. But there are hardliners, there are moderates in both parties.
yep,
And I would
absolutely.
imagine in a one-party system that I would think that there would actually be more factions because there is no opposition party to develop.
And fun fact number 2 for this video, the rifts between the two major factions, only the two major factions, are like day and night. So in terms of, well, what they have in common is essentially that the main purpose of governance is to stay in power. That is the the sense of governance in China is, how do we does this help us staying in power, or is this detrimental to our rule? That is the main question for any kind of policy. And that goes back now, as you were saying, we are a bit off, but actually, no, we're not. When you look at the investments made in Africa, that is essentially serving the purpose of the Chinese Communist Party. It's not serving the Chinese people even. It is certainly not serving those nations. It is certainly not serving the people in those nations.
For votes. That's my opinion.
It is certainly one thing. From a geostrategic perspective, is, well, what is happening if those countries are behind on those loans? Oh, we're just taking the infrastructure, or we are just taking those minerals. or we are just taking this, or we're just doing that. Yeah. At the same time, the benefit that is supposedly coming, big story end of last year in South Africa, where one project was supposed to hire 85% locals, and they barely managed to hire, hold your horses, 20%. The rest was Chinese.
Flip the scale.
Yeah. And let's get into this idea, the reaction. Looking at our first video of when Nancy Pelosi visited Taiwan, all these serious consequences that China is no longer talking to the US, all of these joint committees and stuff, they all benefited China, and now they are not talking to you. I call that a win. So talk about environmental protection discussions. How do these go? The Chinese and the Americans come together. The Chinese agree on something and then do something else. Why waste the time? My first comment was, well, you can no longer get your dissidents from the States back to China. So it's a win-win situation for the States. And what you mentioned, I don't know if we put it in a video actually talking about the political status of Taiwan. We have now British MPs saying we are going to visit Taiwan. We have German government officials saying we are going to visit Taiwan. When do people realize this is basically just, number one, pushing Chairman Xi's buttons? Secondly, no one takes the one China policy serious anymore. We are just not stating it out loud. And this is one thing where
we're showing it through actions, which are actually more meaningful.
I think from the Chinese perspective, it is actually the words that would hurt more.
From a Western perspective,
yeah, they rationalize.
Listen to what we say, but follow the money and follow the actions. That is how you find out where a Western country is headed.
You are thinking from a Western mindset. When I look at the internal backlash, and when I look at the reaction of those ultra nationalists, they are now rationalizing. Yes, it really happened. No, we didn't shoot down her plane, but we were shooting so many missiles in the sea. The Americans have learned their lesson. This is how they are rationalizing it now. And you as an American, you're like, you don't give a fuck. Yeah, they can shoot as many expensive missiles into the sea and claim they have hit something.
We will,
it's difficult
from an American, we have a saying, fuck around and find out. If you actually took an action that took American lives, we will sink your Navy in 48 hours.
Depending on how many losses the US Navy will tolerate, I give them a maximum of 8 hours if the US Navy goes all in.
No, I'm saying 48 hours and not losing a single ship.
I wouldn't be that optimistic about it. One of the things that has led to many serious
Land
issues
of the free, home of the brave. We're kind of optimistic about our chances.
And that's the point. If you're over optimistic about your chances, do credit your enemy with some sense. Yeah, that's my creed. But again, I have seen both militaries operate. It's not even going to be a contest.
If it was Navy versus Navy, there's not a chance that America would lose a ship. Now, given that China is a green water navy, you have to respect China is to my knowledge, the only country that has a dedicated military branch that's missiles and rockets. Yeah. When you factor that in, yeah, we're going to take some damage. Lives will be lost. But if it was Navy to Navy, which it never would be, because China would never put its Navy in a blue water situation against America, because that's just fucking stupid. We will wreck you. So in a conflict where it was fought closer to shore, yes, we would lose some ships, but I would I would argue the fact that that would be not so much to submarines and surface vessels such as the Liaoning are destroyers. I would argue that the Chinese rocketry and missile force would be the ones really bearing the brunt of the damage inflicted.
I'm with you on that, and particularly in the confines of the Taiwan Strait. On the eastern seaboard of Taiwan, it's a completely different story, and this is where
But
the
that's
invasion
green
is
water
going to
to blue
happen.
water.
Yeah.
It's green water in the Taiwan Strait.
The problem is,
Once you get east of Taiwan, it's a blue water fight.
when you get to eastern Taiwan, it's much more of a blue water fight. And as you were saying, it will be a heavy reliance on very expensive missiles. And the problem I see is, for reasons in the Chinese mindset, they are going to saturate the area, and we are going to take big losses.
Accuracy by volume.
Exactly. So that is one thing. And the key thing in this sort of conflict, from my perspective, fun fact number 3, I have been studying naval warfare for 30 years. So the key thing is, if we retain the Western mindset of not firing the first shot and believing that because we think this way, our opponent thinks the same way.
See, I would say if you do not strike first, you will be first struck.
That is exactly what I'm saying. Is you see the same debate about the World War II conflict between the Empire of Japan and the US.
They gave a hell of a first punch. They did. No, they did. They did. That's
tactically, I agree with you.
Well,
strategically, no.
The Japanese first punch almost single-handedly changed the course of American naval doctrine from moving away from battleships and into aircraft carriers, because that is what we were left with, and we figured out how to use them with a fire,
exactly,
an ember in our heart, and a really sore
situation
jaw that we wanted to avenge.
That exactly, you had and Yamamoto said that right on the day of the attack. We have awoken a sleeping giant. And he knew that in any kind of war, he would run out of resources after 6 months.
Well, that's why they invaded the Philippines.
That's what they tried to do, but ultimately, I mean, why I'm bringing this up is I see so many parallels in modern days. We have a totalitarian regime like Japan, like Nazi Germany, like Imperial Germany, that pits itself against, let's call them forces for socio-libertarian freedom, and it was, even from the start, not going to be a contest. So I mean, when you look at this whole geostrategic situation, why are we not going out there? Because we have the money, we have the plans, we have the infrastructure. Why are we not going out there, killing 2 birds with 1 stone? Go into African countries and say, we built the infrastructure, we operate it together, we are getting out in, say, 20 years, it's all yours. And for that to happen, you use your resources in the jointly owned infrastructure, move the products and semi-finished products to, say, the US, say, Europe. We move products back and forth in a trade agreement that we can agree on later on. And looking at this kind of offering, we absolutely can do that. And it is a much better offering than what these countries are getting right now. Why is it not happening? Why are we, even if we are looking from a capitalistic perspective regarding return on investment?
If it don't make money, it don't make sense.
It will make shitloads of money. It will move our supply chain out of China and into countries that we actually culturally are much closer to. So, I mean, we have started doing this and moved critical infrastructure and production into countries like Philippines, Thailand, Myanmar, Bangladesh,
Indonesia.
and so on. Yeah, Indonesia, Malaysia, another set of countries.
Strong industrial centers that can be utilized. They are really producing some good products.
The problem is that as a counter move, China is starting to go into these countries as well. They have now elected someone in the Philippines where every Filipino I know is asking why. Because apparently he is favoring China rather than the US. Why is Myanmar in such a state what it is right now? And
also known as Burma.
Yeah, why is all of a sudden talks between Thailand and China again to finally finish a certain rail project that has been on ice for the last 5 years? So we need to get our act together in both the States and in Europe, because yes, we do have a track record and history, especially Europeans, but I believe a genuine partnership with Africa is not only in our interest, it is in the interest of African nations. It is certainly something worth exploring from both sides, not in a form of atonement for any kind of sins we have committed, but from a sheer practicality. Do you want to transport any kind of good from China to the States or from Africa to the States?
I would say let's work with African nations in a way that the Western world hasn't done before. Let's enter, because Africa has so many resources, and there are things that we can do from an engineering standpoint that would better a lot of African nations. But I would say moving forward, let's try something that we haven't ever done before. Let's try to actually be friends. Let's not. Colonialism happened. Okay, it happened. Let's try a new business model. There are things that we can do for you. There are resources that you can do for yourself and export to us to do for yourself. Let's try a new way of cooperation and let's see how it goes.
Yeah, I
where
think
both sides benefit.
That is exactly what I hope we can do. Like I said, we have the templates in the drawer. We just need to do it. But I think that is also a good point where we can call it a day for today. And
I'm Rish. He's
I'm Roland. And that was us for today. We will see you next week.
R3 Weekend Review.